And there we are. We are live from the Namely Conference in Washington, D.C. We'll start with you on site, Natasha, and then we'll go to our virtual folks for a quick introduction, and then we'll hear more about the conference.
Yeah, so we won't take up hardly any time at all. We'll probably have a couple more. I'm hoping that will come in and join us. They just got a little waylaid on the way here. So I'm Natasha Casey. I teach communications, including media and information literacy at Blackburn College in Carlinville, Illinois.
I'm Ralph Beliveau. I teach at the University of Oklahoma at the Gaylord College of Journalism and Mass Communication, and I teach media studies and documentary and a bunch of stuff.
It's nice to meet you both. Why don't we start with George and Terry, then Chris and Autumn.
Hi, I'm George Station, and I am a lecturer at Cal State Monterey Bay in California, obviously. But I teach a first-year class these days, and it is a technology and society class that meets a social science general education. And I've got a passed in lower division technology courses.
Hi, George.
Hi, George. You win the Impressive Bookshelf Award, too.
It was me next, right? I'm Terry Green. I'm in Peterborough, Ontario, and I'm a learning technology specialist at a local college here, Fleming College.
And I'm sorry, Chris, I've got you muted, but I can't get you unmuted. Autumn?
Chris, if you tap on your phone, you might have some controls that'll come up, and you're just looking for the microphone with the line through it. I'll go ahead and introduce myself if you want to tinker with that, because we would like to get you in for your introduction. So, but yeah, it's probably just tapping on the phone to bring up those controls. So my name is Autumn Keynes, and I'm an instructional designer at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. But in my past life, I have taught digital citizenship as like a first-year seminar course, and of course incorporated media literacy, data literacy, digital literacies, and that kind of thing. Super excited to be here with everyone, and yeah. Thanks for having me. Oh, I'm also a co-director of Virtually Connecting. I always forget to mention that. How's it going, Chris? I feel bad that we muted him. We can't get him unmuted now.
I can't see.
Yeah, it doesn't let you unmute someone.
No.
You mute someone, but it doesn't let you unmute them. They have to unmute themselves.
Okay, so hopefully Chris can figure that out. I'm Helen DeWard. I teach here in Central Ontario at a Faculty of Education, and the courses I teach are media and digital literacies and critical digital literacies. So I'm really excited to be able to connect with the folks at the Namely Conference. So maybe just start with how the conference is feeling, the vibes, conversations that you're having at the conference.
Yeah, I'll start. So yesterday was a pre-conference day, was a research symposium all day, and they tried to do something a little bit different, which was instead of having your kind of traditional panels and, everybody goes for 15 or 20 minutes and questions, they did a roundtable format where you would present your material, every sort of 10 minutes, and people would get up and move, and you'd present it again, and you do that 4 times, and then it was like speed dating. And then you pick your date at the end, and then you do a little Q&A with them. And I think it was pretty successful, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it was kind of like an information overload by the end of it, because that happened 6 times altogether. So, it was great to see that many presentations, and there were even some that I was interested in I couldn't get to. But it's interesting to hear people try to boil their stuff down to a 10-minute consumable chunk.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for academics on the best of days.
Yeah.
So it was good, though.
Mm-hmm.
Was there something that really stood out for you? Something that you said, oh, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, there were a couple of things for me. Off the top of my head, there's a guy, I don't know where Rob Greco's from. Mike Rob Greco.
I'm trying to remember that.
He is writing basically a history of media literacy in the States, and talked a lot about how there's so many gaps in that history, so that when people come to the field or they're new to the area, you know, you sort of learn from other people, but there's no sort of history written about it. And his is only focusing on the role of the Center for Media Literacy in its early days, up through the 90s, I think. But that was really interesting because I think it really fills a gap in the field. So I was pretty excited by his work on that.
Yeah, I noticed that there were a number of people, of course, talking about different ways of approaching and discussing fake news, specifically as a problem, which I think is great, but sometimes also sidesteps sort of the more broad media literacy questions. Also because there are a lot of library people there, their work then ends up being from an information literacy perspective. And actually, Natasha's presentation, which was about looking at the relationship between media literacy and information literacy, was quite good. There was also a lot of people talking about design thinking, which I thought was an interesting influence. I think there's some potential challenges with it, but it's a really interesting way of thinking about learning design in a slightly different way than what we're used to in traditional curriculum development anyway.
One other thing I'd say about just that day was there's a lot of internationals here, and I was at Namely in Chicago 2 years ago, and I don't remember quite as many internationals. So there's a lot of Australians here, and so I think what it points to is the global need and the global desire to see media education, media literacy education in schools. And yeah, so I thought that was an interesting dimension. Lots of internationals here.
And probably seeing a lot of variation in the conversations, I bet, between what the U.S. Media space has compared to Australians or other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. There had to be at least a dozen countries, I would say, represented, from Singapore to, of course, Canadians. Europe. Lots of different perspectives on it too. So that was good.
Yeah, there was one that was a discussion of an educational program that focuses on genocide. And the discussion was run by, I'm trying to remember where he was from.
Yeah, Melky's from Lebanon.
Yeah. So what was interesting about it is what he said is over the years he's been doing the program, because they're in Austria when they do the program, focus on the Holocaust genocide. And then other people are interested in sort of getting attention paid to their sort of like local situation, either a different piece of genocidal history or something like that. But it sounded like a really interesting program. And that was one of those things that's kind of like a universal, interesting problem of getting one's head around, that whole situation.
We'll get any of our virtual folks to jump in. If you've got any questions.
Let's see. I do have a question. Actually, I'm wondering if Chris is back. Autumn and Helen, if you wanted to give Chris a chance to introduce.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Shear. I'm a social studies teacher from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I got involved in media literacy early on in my education career. I've been teaching for 18 years. I'm an Iraq War veteran, and when I was overseas and came back, seeing the difference in the way our news and journalism covered the war in the United States versus overseas was very eye-opening for me. And so I always made it a point to incorporate media literacy and bias in news coverage when I was teaching a current events class when I came back from Iraq. And I'm big on hip hop ed, so I make music and I incorporate critical media literacy in my songs. And so I'm really big on that. I actually was involved in a reality show. My school was filmed for a prom reality show. And I now incorporate that as part of my lesson planning in regards to teaching media literacy and critical media literacy. So I'm very excited to meet all of you, even if it's just virtually. And so as I was mentioning to people in the virtual chat before we got started, I put in a proposal to teach an elective semester-based course at my high school. And so I'm curious to hear from everybody on what their schools do and how can I go about furthering curriculum and development for media literacy and critical media literacy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. Yes, hopefully you can pick up some tips and ideas from the conversations today and tomorrow.
That's what I'm hoping.
So I've got a question for, I think it might be for Natasha, based on what we got in the intros as far as your presentation, because I, in undergrad and lower division undergrad, I taught a combined technology info-lit course for some years until our campus decided that all our students were digital natives, which is another conversation. And but these days, there's been a resurgence of interest in media literacy, web literacy, various digital literacies. Not all digital, but a lot of it's digital these days. So I'm wondering if you could say more about that gap or potential bridge between info lit and media lit, because for me in particular, my dog in the hunt is that I co-taught that course with librarians for more than 10 years. So I'm kind of steeped in info lit, but also because of the technology side, I was always kind of steeped in the rest of the digital literacies that aren't specifically info lit. And wondering if you could say more about maybe the ups and downs or pros and cons of, how's it going with bridging that difference between info lit and media lit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I with a library director, developed a media and information literacy course, and then we wrote about the course about 5 years ago. And so I've been working pretty closely with a librarian over the last 5 years. And what I think has happened, or the way I see it coming from a media studies communications point of view, is that we have not sort of kept up with the way information literacy has evolved. I think we still think about information literacy, and again, I'm talking from the media studies and communications viewpoint. I think we still think about them as like catalogs and databases and checklists, when there's this very vibrant, critical information literacy scholarship and practice that has emerged over the last 15 to 20 years. And I think that's the piece that's missing. So as my course and research became more focused on critical media and critical information literacy, there's a natural alliance there, because we're borrowing from the same theoretical traditions. We have shared interests, the language is the same. And from my perspective, media literacy is so marginalized often within media studies and communications that to make some alliances with librarians, especially if they have a critical dimension to them, is a natural one, and the way that we can sort of bust out not only of our silos, but can have a greater impact in the academy and beyond the academy. So that's sort of my take on it anyway.
Okay, that's wonderful, because our campus is, I think, just starting to have that conversation. And we started this spring with a small group of us that had several librarians and several discipline faculty in the room. So it's kind of a renewed conversation based on where we think we are these days. And the librarians brought in the new ACRL framework and that kind of thing, which was all very helpful. Yeah. And I was still thinking of it as just the beginning. And I think it's that marginalization aspect you're talking about, because at least on my campus, the librarians are pretty, I won't say entrenched, but they've got little beachheads all over campus, in across the various colleges and disciplines, whereas the media literacy aspect and the other digital literacies and so on are just barely considered by this or that scattered faculty. But of course, it's very important in the communication studies classes.
Yeah, and the one thing I was saying yesterday, and I'm happy to share this with you, George, if you hit me up on Twitter, I'll send it to you. It's like kind of 5 must-reads if you're thinking about an alliance between critical media literacy and critical information literacy. But I'll say no more about it, because Renee Hobbs is in the house. Woo, 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 woo.
Hey there, virtually connecting. Thank you.
Oh, we are so happy to see you.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you for agreeing to talk to us.
Oh, wow, we're rocking and rolling here. I'm telling you, it's 90 degrees and in 90% humidity and a lot of really smart and thoughtful people. I just got out of the propaganda workshop, and the level of critical analysis. I mean, this is a world-class group of critical media thinkers.
Yeah.
There were some really sophisticated responses to that session.
Yeah, there was a meme analysis exercise, and a couple of the responses were really striking.
Yeah.
Because they were, they often, I think, part of the point is that memes require some context and often have different ways that you can interpret what they're saying. And there were a couple of the interpretations that were just kind of like jaw-dropping in terms of how they were reading the way the memes were.
Yeah, so we really got to illustrate this idea of the ambiguity. When messages are ambiguous, they get to be read in different ways. People fill in the gaps, and the way they fill in the gaps creates big aha experiences. And what did you think of the question game at the beginning of our session? We played this really fun game called the question game. You put two people at the front of the room. You establish the rules that they can only interact with each other by asking questions. So question, 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 question. If the audience, the rest of the class is the judge, so if somebody hesitates or asks a silly question or makes a statement that's not a question, they call foul, right? And we watched this piece of Finnish propaganda created by the Health and Human Services people. It's this bizarre piece of, it's shot in black and white on a Finnish scene. It's a beautiful Finnish mother with her 3-year-old daughter on the beach, and they're playing in the sand, and it's just so lovely. And it looks like a movie, right? You don't really know what it is. And then all of a sudden, the mother gets a phone call on her cell, and she starts to do her cell phone business, and the 3-year-old child gets picked up by a big black bird and taken away. And in Finnish, the slogan says, "Inattention is a form of violence." Ooh, right? And,
wow.
Yeah. So the questioners just had a field day, asking questions about it. And what happens is that as they generate questions, the audience also generates questions, right? And you start to realize that, teachers do all of the question asking. We don't give students practice to generate questions. And so this is like the kind of propaganda is a natural way to activate intellectual curiosity and get kids to generate questions that lead them to want to be more curious. Why would the Finnish government have such a fear-inducing form of propaganda that makes mothers feel guilty for checking their cell phones? Wow. Yeah.
So do you see a lot of threads coming together in terms of media education, in terms of I don't know, cross collaborations in you talk about memes and you talk about media, video production and propaganda. What else? How do you see that happening in our conversations at the conference?
It's complicated, yes. I think. Yeah. You know what? It's partly the design of the program is that we are in different places. So I don't think we're really getting a full taste of the diversity of the media literacy community, which is, I think, a bit of a pity. Yesterday we had the researchers together, and there was quite a lot of diversity amongst that group. You could really see different disciplines, different methodological lenses, different topics of interest.
Yeah, different audiences. Yeah. And as we said before, different people from all kinds of countries. So it's hard to pull out, are there commonalities? Because I think this is part of the challenge, isn't it? Always, it's like there are some things that overlap, but there's a lot of differences, and people are always trying to reinvent the wheel. So I don't know that we always advance if we can think about it as a field. as quickly as we would like. It's hard to assess.
Yeah, I think the thing I'm seeing that's the kind of bread and butter thing that everybody has in common. Everybody analyzes media and has creative strategies for building those analytic skills.
Yeah.
Everybody's having students create media
Yeah.
and building creative strategies for how media creation works.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of a large wraparound around themes of social justice, around issues of democracy and citizenship, around equality, inequality. So there's those frames. Those are the three themes I see. I think because we're all not in the same place in a way. So, in the past, typically I've said, when a media literacy people get together, on the first day, we're all very nice and friendly. On the second day, we start to argue. And by the third day, we're like screaming at each other.
So tomorrow morning's virtually connecting session better be early enough in the day to avoid the arguments after lunch.
You may see that during the day they emerge, but it's also possible that the way this thing is programmed, we're not rubbing up against each other.
No.
So we might not have as many fights because
Yeah.
we're not actually we're in different spaces.
But I think there's also a lot of new faces, and I think I've seen more librarians here this year than last time. I see more instructional designers. I mean, there's a diversity in terms of people and their backgrounds and their areas of interest, and I think that's good. That's healthy.
There was also something Jeff Scher said yesterday that I thought was really stuck with me, where, it was kind of a conversation about the fake news context and everything. And he said sometimes that can pull you too much away from how the rest of the news industry is normalizing a particular way of doing things. I thought it was a really good point, because in a lot of these contexts, it's like pulling out to a larger picture to say, what counts as normal in film production or in radio or, in any of these other industries, that sometimes we focus on a specific thing, but there are these larger normalizations that happen, like just the difference between public and private, for example. A lot of people in the hallway here who are from public television or POV or, those kind of organizations that are pretty much part of the public sector interested in advancing media. So there's kind of a little bit, and that's kind of a built-in friction too, between sort of the public and private presence in the media.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just if this might be in a different direction, and forgive me if I'm sidetracking things. I'm curious if you all have heard. Has there been much of a conversation around data, and creating profiles, micro targeting of news, and things like that? And where's that conversation at the conference right now?
So at the research symposium yesterday, we announced that the JMLE is having a special issue on data literacy in education. And so that call is out on the website now. Theo van Oudenhoven from Netherlands is the guest editor for that issue. And he's drawn a pretty wide net around everything from the personalized learning and the sort of data collection that's going on inside the education sector to issues around algorithm biases and the selling of data, the Joe Turow kind of stuff around marketing practices that are increasingly relying on geolocation services. So there's definitely an interest in this community.
There's a couple of classroom demos, and that's another feature of the conference that I think has a lot of potential. So you'd attend a demonstration like you were in the class. This is what it would look like. These are the teachers teaching their lesson. And there's a couple of those that have incorporated the kinds of things that you're talking about, Autumn. But it's not as massive a presence as you might think. But I think it's because, and not a lot in the field, this is a bit of a sweeping generalization, are up to date on the data literacy and that stuff as well. So
it is intimidating, right? Like the data piece of it gets a little intimidating sometimes, but yeah, I'm very interested in that conversation.
Yeah, we're all learning.
Yeah, to
right?
of the internet, requires you to keep learning, and so we see some of that though. I think there's definitely some.
I did notice a little bit of tension. I was probably part of that. There was a long dialogue between Michelle Lipton and what's his name? The
Oh yeah,
Reuters guy.
Thompson Reuters.
Yeah, he's a very big supporter of media literacy. He's done a lot with Michelle in New York City. It's a good thing. We like having big name journalists kind of support media literacy.
Stephen Adler.
Yeah, but at some point I reached one of the fears I have is that all of the focus on news and all of the focus on source credibility and fact checking actually takes us away from understanding the full complexity of media literacy.
Yes.
Especially as we care about popular culture, as we care about issues of representation, as we care about the political economy. Those things never get talked about if we're always talking about fake news. Right.
And but on the flip side, it's like it's created this opportunity for us to introduce media literacy to much wider audiences. So there's the dichotomy, isn't it? It's like the road in for many people, but at the same time, I do feel the same way that there's this momentum towards news literacy, and that's fantastic. But have you talked to a group of 20-year-olds lately? Like none of them are consuming news,
And can I interject? I'm big on the idea of creating K through 12, K through 16 national standards. And so I hear what you're saying. Like when at the conference, you have all these people from different academic backgrounds that are going in from different perspectives, and obviously they're not always going to agree on different methods and perspectives. But at the same time, what I would like to see is there any way that we can come to some type of universal basic agreement of saying here are some basic at the elementary level, here are some things we should be introducing to students on the elementary school level. I have a 11-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter. And I'm just thinking, okay, when they turn on the Cartoon Network and they're watching cartoons and the advertisement comes on and it's it's the greatest toy ever. And then your son or daughter comes up to you and say, Mommy, Daddy, you got to buy this. It's the greatest toy ever. And so simple media literacy with consumerism and, you can do the social justice stuff that I'm heavily into. As a social studies teacher, I'm also into the political aspect and the journalism aspect, but I'm also big on all different aspects of media literacy. And I would love to see the academic community come together on at least some general K through 12, general standards that all 50 states can kind of, begin adopting. And then along the way, when you get to that secondary and post-secondary level, then you can get deeper into those, more critical, heavy academic, philosophical, issues that, all the PhDs, graduate level, professors are engaging in. So what are your thoughts on getting the community together on that kind of level?
Yeah, so of course there's a lot of people here who have been pretty active in the policy arena. Mike Eisenberg from Seattle, Washington is here. Washington just adopted some media literacy standards in their state. Of course, Pam Stager led the charge in Rhode Island. I was just in Indiana last week. Indiana has media literacy in their state standards, but be careful what you wish for because they're awful. Okay, so standards are a political process. It's not about a bunch of academics and getting together in the room. We could barely agree amongst the academics, but it's the policy makers that influence how standards get articulated in American public education because we're decentralized at the state and local level. Yeah. And so when you look at media literacy standards in the United States, the states have each inflect media literacy with an ideology that reflects the underlying pathologies of the state, right? Yeah. And so you have to have a strong stomach to be up for, as an academic, to be up for that because it's really then addressing I've got a great set of K-6 standards in my book, Discovering Media Literacy, but I really don't feel like mud wrestling with the preschool, early childhood educators who are going to wrestle me to the ground that mine are they're too many, they're too big, they want two,
Right.
which two, and they're always going to pick the two that are like the ones that they're already doing.
Oh, wow.
There's also just, in case it's not obvious, there's a real allergy to national standards for reasons of state self-determination. Even though what happens in a lot of cases, I teach at the University of Oklahoma, my wife helped to write the English language arts standards. And so they said, oh, we can't do Common Core, we have to come up with our own. And what they come out with is still almost exactly like Common Core. They claim it's their own, right? So sometimes that, again, it's like, be careful what you wish for.
So something like I have in Ontario, here in Ontario, media literacy is part of the curriculum. Media literacy is part of the curriculum in other provincial educational sectors, similar to each state doing their own thing. But then we have Media Smarts that pulls it all together and warehouses and curates all of that so that I can quickly find media literacy expectations, outcomes from British Columbia and wrap it into an activity here in Ontario. So some type of a kind of an umbrella organization to pull it all together.
Yeah, that would be Namely.
Yeah, I mean,
oh, okay, yeah.
This is a topic that's come up constantly in the last 36 hours. Can we have a repository? Can we have some place that we can all go to that at least lists the organizations so that there's some type of mapping in place? And I think we are on the cusp of doing that, but it's probably still a ways off yet.
So I have a related question, I think, that ties into this. And I'm wondering if you have seen any kind of connection, or is there a huge gap between K-12 and I think maybe Chris mentioned K-12 and K-16, but there seems to be that line at 12, that going into undergrad, and it may be just perception, like what I see is somebody in undergrad, but these issues and potential outcomes and all of that seem to overlap. And I think it's because of what Renee said about that mud wrestling between K-6 and pre-K. There would seem to be a potential conflict between, I'm going to say, high school and undergrad. And I'm wondering if you see anything going on there.
So we saw the data from Sherry Culver's survey this morning. They presented a survey on 400 or 500 media literacy educators. Librarians are the biggest group, followed by college faculty, with K-12 teachers in third place. So at least when it comes to this group, librarians, college faculty, and then K-12, which wasn't quite what I expected, because I thought it seems like there's a lot of K-12 people here. But among the college faculty, there's really just two clusters, right? There's the communication media people.
Right.
Here they are. And then there's the teacher education people.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that we find very interesting conversations between those two groups of faculty, right? We're teaching students in different ways for different purposes, but we're using some of the same instructional practices.
Yes,
so I find that really cool.
Yeah, I think that the greatest difference for me between those two groups is always the assessment. Like education seems to be just absolutely obsessed, as all of I think US colleges are. Like data, I want numbers. Show me how you're assessing it. How is it working? And prove to me in a quantitative way. And I think that's a disconnect as a qualitative researcher. Yeah.
This is obsessed a word?
Obsessed.
Obsessed with assessment.
Yeah.
Obsessed with assessment. Yeah. So I think there's not as much tension between the secondary and the higher ed as you would think.
Yeah. I think
it's a very good dialogue. Even I think today I went to on podcasting. There were a lot of higher ed faculty in the room, even though the presenter was talking about doing podcasting with like fourth graders. So some of the instructional practices work well with learners of all ages.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Okay, thank you. And I think the part of my question also came up the other day because of all the ISTE stuff going on, and nobody in undergrad that I associate with talks about ISTE unless they happen to be in teacher ed or something, right? So there's clearly all this stuff going on in K-12 that seems to apply, and then there's this line where nobody, if they're not in teacher ed, or maybe some librarians or whoever, people don't know what ISTE is. They don't look at that, So that's why, that's the other thing that was maybe even further beneath, my original question, but definitely what you brought up today.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that. That helps a lot.
Ellen, I think we're getting to the point where we have to.
I was just going to say, we've been almost 40 minutes, and I know that conference time is so precious to you guys. So I really appreciate that you took time out of your busy day to be here. And hopefully we'll continue to connect and have these great conversations for the sake of teachers like Chris, who's here coming in off the beach today just to be part of this conversation. So thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
We love you. Bye, guys. Thanks for
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.